I can't have more money because I can't be trusted to be responsible with it. This was a sentence shared in a room full of women that I'd asked to complete that sentence. I can't have more money because. And within about 90 seconds, thousands of messages were flooding in the chat. That their hearts were beating faster, a tighter chest, hands going cold. One woman actually described the words that were stuck in her throat. Physically, she couldn't finish the sentence. Now, not one of these women had even opened their bank account app or looked at a single number. All I'd actually asked them to do was to say the words out loud, and their bodies took over the response. And today, we're going to navigate the 4 biggest emotions that block every single money decision. This is episode 2 of The Body of Wealth. And in episode 1, we talked about why your body won't let you change your money patterns. And I introduced the practice around noticing the somatic patterns in the body. If you haven't watched that one yet, go back and start there. The link's in the description. And everything today is going to be building on that foundation. For anyone who hasn't met me before, my name's Catherine Morgan. I spent over 17 years as a financial advisor, and I can tell you I gave hundreds of people great financial advice, practical personalized plans, investment strategies, and do you know what happened? A large number of them didn't follow the plan. And at first I thought they just needed more information, more detail, better charts, clearer spreadsheets. So I'd give them more and still nothing changed. And it took me many years to understand what was really happening. The information that I was giving them was landing in their heads from a logical perspective, but their bodies were saying something completely different. Their bodies were saying, this is not me. This is dangerous. This is not safe. Stay where you are. Don't take risks. And actually, there's a lot of research that I've since discovered since moving into the mindset, psychology, and somatic space. And this research particularly is from Dr. Candice Purr. And she talks about how the cells store emotional memory. And every single cell in your body has receptors for emotion, which means that your relationship with money isn't just a thought pattern, it's a whole body experience. I've also been geeking out a lot on reading further research around how we can map specific emotions to specific areas of the body. And actually in 2013, there was a research team in Finland, and they asked over 700 people across 3 different cultures to map where they felt different emotions in their body. And the results were extraordinary. The maps were virtually identical, regardless of whether the person was Finnish, Swedish, or Taiwanese. A lot of fear lit up areas in the chest and in the stomach area. Sadness kind of was felt over the whole body, sort of a heaviness feeling. And shame activated the face and the throat. Anger also fired up arms and hands. Now, these are measurable, repeatable biological responses that are in this experiment were the same across those cultures, which really shows us that the body has an emotional geography. And what I find really interesting is that these patterns were the same across these cultures, which tells us actually something really interesting, that this isn't a personal failing. This is a human experience. These emotions weren't created by you. Many of us weren't even, many of these emotions that we carry around money may not have even been created in our own lifetime. They may have been inherited and passed down through the family lineage, through communities, through money operating systems that taught us that money means survival and survival means fear. Now, the science gives us the map, and the map is interesting, but what matters most here is, where do you feel it? Where do you feel the emotions that you may be carrying around money, and what do you do about it? And when we're going to be talking today about these 4 emotions that tend to show up around money, I want you to, as you're listening, check it out against your own personal experiences. Notice where it might land for you as we're talking through this today. And I want you to know that when I name these 4 emotions, most people recognize at least 2 of them in themselves straight away. Some people might recognize all 4, and that recognition is the beginning of change. So let's talk about the 4 emotions that are most certainly influencing every single money decision that you are making. So the first one is grief. And I want to tell you a little bit about a client I work with called Sarah. And Sarah came to see me after navigating a pretty terrifying divorce. She was earning really, really well in her marriage. She had a thriving business. She had a really high income. She was earning over $120,000 a year. She had savings in place. She'd been doing all the right things from what the money operating system tells us to do. And on paper, she was financially secure. But Sarah struggled to make a single financial decision for herself. She'd sit down to look at her numbers and her accounts, and she would just instantly get this feeling in her body, and she would just stop and walk away. And when we explored what was actually going on for Sarah, she'd sit down and look at her accounts, and what was happening is that she was just feeling this real heaviness in her entire body, like almost like someone was pressing down on her, was how she described it. And it felt like a weighted blanket. And that heaviness, it turned out, was grief. Now, when I say grief and money in the same sentence, you might be thinking, well, did Sarah lose somebody? Was she going through a bereavement? And yes, losing someone you love can obviously have a profound impact on your financial life. I've seen it many times. But financial grief is so much bigger than bereavement and loss. It can sometimes be the grief for the financial life that you thought you'd have by now, the business that you wanted to create, that you'd imagined that you would have, perhaps the retirement that didn't quite happen in the way that you wanted it to. And in Sarah's case, it was wrapped around her marriage, the marriage that she had built and co-created, that no longer existed. And so she wasn't grieving a loss of a person. She was grieving a future that didn't materialize because of her divorce. And every time she looked at money, her body remembered what those numbers were supposed to mean and what they actually represented now. And financial grief is one of those experiences that maybe you have experienced in yourself. I certainly have had many times where a few short years ago, I built a 7-figure business, I burnt it down, and it took me a period of 9 months to work through that whole grief of letting go what was a very significant revenue stream in my life and all these expectations of what I thought this business was going to look like, when actually it just didn't sit well in terms of how it was making me feel. So financial grief can show up in many, many different ways. There's also some really interesting research in the Finnish body mapping research that I spoke about earlier, where this kind of feeling or sadness can also show up through financial grief in the chest and this kind of heaviness. And in something I'm going to be talking about in some future episodes, I really rooted myself down in using emotional freedom technique, otherwise known as EFT. And I was very quickly able to recognize this heaviness in my body. And I was able to quite quickly clear some of that heaviness away from my body so that my logical brain could get back online. And I could then really start to step into the visionary part of, what is it that I want my life to look like? What is it do I want my business to look like if it's not this? And it did take some time to work through using emotional freedom technique, but it also provided me with an opportunity to really understand, what did grief sound like? What did it sound like for me? What did it feel like for me? And sometimes grief can have a very particular voice in the way that we communicate about money through our language. And so grief can have a voice like, what's the point? Or I should be further along now than I am. or this was supposed to look different. It almost sounds like a resignation. And it can sometimes be perceived by other people hearing that as laziness or lack of motivation. And so if you are a financial professional watching this and you're thinking about a client who's maybe withdrawn from money conversations with you, maybe someone who has experienced a bereavement, a widow, who doesn't engage in conversations anymore, or you've had an initial conversation with someone who's inherited some money and they've just ghosted you, or, maybe it is in a divorce scenario like Sarah, where the divorcee won't make decisions about the settlement money. Well, it may very well be that grief is in the room. And some of the grief I see isn't, as I have already mentioned, about personal loss. It can be grief of other areas. It could be grief of the promise that you were going to get a job and it was given to somebody else, or that you followed all of the rules around money and still are not in a place of financial security, maybe because of situations outside of your control. I've seen it a lot as well in the work I've done with some domestic abuse charities, where women and men have been in narcissistic relationships and they have experienced financial abuse. And there's a huge amount of financial grief underneath all of those experiences. And even if that grief is no longer happening, the body thinks that it is. And it can just be the slightest trigger that can take your whole body back into experiencing financial grief. So grief is a really big emotion around money. And the second emotion I want to talk about that can be very interconnected with grief is fear. And fear is probably one of the most common money emotions that I encounter. And I also think it's the most misunderstood emotion. And fear can show up in many, many ways with money. Fear there won't be enough, fear that maybe if you have more than other people, that they won't like you, or that you'll somehow feel detached from them. Fear of success that makes you feel like, well, what would happen if I was successful? Would I be judged? Would I be envied? Would I be exposed? And I've had many clients that I've worked with and who maybe raise their prices in their business, and then all of a sudden it raises this fear of success and their whole body can react to that, this like protection response. And going back to the Finnish research that I was mentioning earlier, that report showed that fear and danger triggered the strongest sensations in the chest and in the stomach. And that's what I see a lot too. Sometimes it can be in the jaw, like kind of a feeling of the jaw tightening, or breathlessness, or a sudden urge to just look away. And it's that urge, that sense of danger that is trying to keep you safe, but really it's fear trying to communicate. Fear is trying to say, I'll do it tomorrow. Or fear is trying to say, I just don't want to know. Like, it's probably fine, but I'm just not ready to look at it right now. And so it can then be disguised as procrastination or busyness. We busy ourselves, or we tell ourselves, I just need one more qualification before I can raise my prices. And again, as a financial professional, if you're listening to this, think about the client who panics the moment the stock market dives, even when you've shown them that they've got a solid financial plan, right? That panic that they're experiencing in the stomach, in the chest, it's not responding to logic when you're telling them, don't worry, we'll just hold fire, the markets will recover. It's not responding to that logic. And no amount of reassurance is going to calm that fear down in the body. And it may very well be that fear has been the emotion that's been holding you back in that space. Let's talk about the other two emotions, and then I'm going to share an exercise for you to do around these emotions. Now the next emotion is one of the hardest emotions to shift, and that is shame. And it's the one that I see creates the most financial impact for clients. Is also the one that connects to something I'm going to show you at the end of the episode. And shame is one of those very quiet emotions. It's the one that sits behind other emotions. It's the one often that can sit alongside anger or guilt, but it's very different to guilt. And I first of all just want to share a little personal experience of how this plays out. When I was about 9 years old, I lost some money. It was quite a small amount of money. It was when we were on a family trip to Warwick Castle, and I'd lost it down a drain. And the response that I got from the adults around me was like, how could you have lost that money? Like, how silly that you lost this money. Now, at the time, I'm sure it wasn't said with any malice or desire to create shame. But as a 9-year-old, that's how I felt. That was my interpretation and what I made it mean about myself. And so for years, every time someone talked about money, I physically couldn't speak because I felt this deep shame. And Brené Brown is a shame researcher. Her books, again, are fabulous. And she clearly distinguishes the difference between guilt and shame. And she says that guilt is I did something bad, and shame is I am bad, which means that guilt is about the behavior, but shame is about our identity. And that distinction is everything when it comes to money. Because when shame attaches to money, it doesn't just say, I made a bad decision. It says, I am bad with money. So it fuses the pattern of money with the identity. And Brené Brown's research also shows that shame needs 3 things in order to grow. It needs secrecy, it needs silence, and it needs judgment. And think about that in the context of money. We don't talk about what we earn. We hide our debts. We judge ourselves and expect other people to judge us. Money is the perfect environment for shame to thrive. Shame about earning too much. Who do I think I am? Shame about earning not enough. I should have figured this out by now. Shame of not being good with money, even when nobody actually taught us how to be good with money. Now, the Finnish body mapping research found that shame activates in the face, in the head, and in the upper chest. And in my experience with money specifically, it lives in my throat. That tightness that stops you from speaking about money, I just get like a feeling of pebbles right in the base of my throat. And it would also show up with like a dry sensation in my throat. And these are all patterns to notice. They're patterns to notice. And shame can sound like, I should know this by now. Who am I to charge that? Everyone else seems to have this figured out. I'm too old to still be struggling with this. And so for financial professionals, shame is the client who physically cannot say the number, who slides their bank account across, like their statement across the table and looking away. The one who laughs nervously and says, oh, I know, it's terrible, right? They're not asking for judgment. They're literally bracing their entire body for it. They're expecting it because their body's expecting it. So has shame ever stopped you from having a money conversation? It certainly has for me. And the final emotion I want to lead into from here is the one of resentment. And the best way to describe resentment and how this shows up with money is to give you an example here of, I remember, again, when I was a financial advisor, I was working with a couple, and everything that I suggested, one of the partners in that relationship would agree, and one would dismiss it. And this happened for like 45 minutes in the meeting. And at the end, one of them looked over at me, and I remember, not at the time, but now looking back, I literally remember this like rage in her face. I remember she didn't want to be in that meeting. She wasn't angry, but she was beyond angry. She was carrying these years of resentment about money, resentment towards her partner who'd spent money within their marriage without even thinking about it. Resentment about being the one who always had to go and sort it out. Resentment towards quite possibly a system that promised that if she worked hard enough, she'd be fine. And I remember afterwards reflecting, having had this knowledge, thinking about, well, until she probably recognized what was happening in her body, it wouldn't have mattered what I had shared with her, what was in her financial plan. And resentment is the emotion that we struggle to admit to because it doesn't feel acceptable. You know, we're told to be grateful, we're told to be abundant, we're told to just let it go, forgive. And so resentment often is the one that kind of hovers underneath, but our body does hold on to it. And I think about this a lot because when I look at money, and I've been looking at money for over 20 years, what I see very clearly is a system that was built on a very particular kind of energy. It was built on control. It was built around hierarchy, accumulation, individual accumulation. And for generations, we've been taught that the way to feel safe with money is to play by those rules. But for so many of us, and I think especially for women, especially for caregivers, for anyone whose natural instinct is to give and to nurture, those rules never really felt right in our bodies. And so I think a lot of the resentment that we're carrying might not just be about your partner's decisions with money or your parents' decisions with money. I actually think it is your body recognizing that we've been trying to fit into a system that is never shaped around who we actually are. And I feel so strongly about this. And what would actually be possible if we were to contemplate how we would feel differently if we were to perhaps ignore some of those old money paradigms, those old money systems that don't work in this day and age. Certainly, if I even just take a moment to think about, as a neurodivergent adult, money systems like budgeting will never work for somebody who is impulsive because of the way that their brain is wired. But yet we are still flooded with financial education about just go look at your numbers and set a budget, right? It's a system that doesn't work. It's broken. And so when I think about these 4 really, really important emotions, and I want to be really clear about something, these emotions that they're not problems to fix. They are information. Your body has stored these emotions because it's trying to show you and tell you that something is important here about what you're feeling and how it's connected to money. And so once we start to recognize which of these emotions is running, everything can start to change from there. So in episode 1, I gave you the body notice practice. And today I want to give you the second practice in this series. And this directly connects into Brené Brown's research on shame. And it's about separating your identity away from the pattern. So remember, Brené Brown talked about how shame is I am bad. It's about our identity with ourselves. And we see this with all 4 emotions, not just with shame. But when we're in the grip of one of these emotions, we speak in identity language. So we'll say things like, I'm bad with money. I'm someone who can't hold on to money. I'm not responsible with money. I'm the kind of person who earns more than everybody else. So it's these I am statements. And these I am statements are the ones I want you to replace. So I want you to make one small shift today. I want you to replace these I am statements with I have a pattern of. Can you feel the difference? I am is pretty permanent. It's your identity. There's nowhere to go from there. But I have a pattern of creates space for compassion. It's a pattern that you've probably learned. And something that you have learned can change. You can unlearn a pattern. And this is what Candace Pert's research points us towards. The emotion that you are experiencing is real, but it belongs to an old experience, not to who you are. So when you separate the pattern from your identity, you literally give your whole body permission to just let it go, let it go. And I don't mean pretend that it doesn't exist. I don't mean bypass it with positive thinking. These 4 emotions are carrying real information. So what I mean is let it go from your identity. Let it stop defining who you are and what you're allowed to have. Because when enough of us can separate these patterns from our identity, when enough of us stop saying I'm bad with money and start recognizing that we've inherited this system that's made us feel that way, something much bigger than individual healing becomes possible. So try it right now. Whatever you say about yourself and money, take the I am reference out and replace it with I have a pattern of, and feel the difference. Feel the space that you've created. And that's where change begins. So this week, what I'd love you to practice is use the body notice from episode 1. And then when you feel one of these 4 emotions around money, notice it, name it, catch those I am statements, and then rewrite them into I have a pattern of. And you might just be quite surprised about how much space opens up when you do. And then you can step into a place of emotional freedom. And there is a tool that works directly with these emotions in the body that is called emotional freedom technique, otherwise known as tapping or EFT. And it uses very specific acupuncture points to help your body release the emotional charge that it's been holding. Now, I use it in my own practice. I've seen a lot of shifts around money for me personally from using emotional freedom technique. And I'm going to be talking more about this next week. I have a guest who's going to be joining us. We're going to do a little bit of a live demonstration of emotional freedom technique. So if it's something that you are interested in learning more about, then come and join us on the channel next Monday. And if you have felt something land in your body while I was talking today, I want you just to recognize, first of all, which of those emotions is it? Then come and listen to the episode next week where we'll teach you another tool that you can add to your toolkit. And if you're ready to work with these emotions with me as well in a online container, if you comment the word waitlist, we are opening up the doors to Wealth Resonance, which is our online intimate experience where we will teach you emotional freedom technique amongst other modalities to really support you to bring all of this work together and not just releasing the emotional pattern, but also helping you step into your money visionary and how to then create changes in the mind and in the body and in the heart. So comment waitlist below and join our waitlist for Wealth Resonance. If you're listening on the podcast, I will pop the link in the show notes for you. And also, if you haven't had a chance to grab our little mini course, The Body of Wealth, it's $37 or £27. And it's a 3-hour experience online that will support you in body mapping and going into these emotion, these responses, these patterns, and really understanding what's the pattern that's really keeping you stuck right now and how do you move from that place. If this episode has helped you and you're watching on my YouTube channel, I would really appreciate a thumbs up. It really helps other people to find this work, and hit the subscribe button. And I'm really looking forward to joining you again next week, where we'll be diving deeper into the tools of emotional freedom technique. I'll see you next week.